Very few things in this world scream potential as much as an all-primed red Sherman hull that's upside down. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled M4A3 Sherman tank. The model that you see in this video was built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and/or purchase. However, like I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Just like with the other 1/16 builds that are found on this channel, this model underwent an extensive rebuild and redetailing phase. However, in order to go over all of this information, it can't be done in one video because it would just make for a video that would be way too long. So instead, I'm going to follow the same format that I've been utilizing on several other 1/16 scale build videos as of late, where the model is going to be discussed in a three-part video series, discussing the base starter kit as well as the condition that the model was in when it was delivered to the shop. We're also going to be going over some aspects of the build during the model's construction. Part 2 is going to focus exclusively on the completed portion of the model, where we go over the various accessories and modifications that were made to the model in order to get it up to the condition that you see it here. And because the model is fully radio controlled, I'll be taking this vehicle out for a test drive, and I'll wrap it up with some final thoughts of the model and the build overall. So as you can see, there's going to be a ton of content coming at you guys. And with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and dig into this video. And here's the model at the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing a 1/16 scale radio-controlled M4A3 Sherman tank from Taigen. Now for my subscribers, and as well as individuals who frequent the ECA channel and are following many of my 1/16 scale Taigen rebuilds, this box here should look familiar because it was acquired from the same source. That source being TaigenTanks.com. Now, TaigenTanks.com is the front end for the IMEX model company, and IMEX is the US importer for the Taigen as well as the Toro 1/16 scale tank models. TaigenTanks.com features the entire range of the 1/16 scale RTR models from Taigen as well as Toro, but they also include a wide range of aftermarket detail components as well as electronic hop-up parts as well. Now, just like with the other 1/16 Taigen rebuilds that are on the channel that I built for my own personal collection, this model here came from the TaigenTanks.com scratch and dent section. Like I frequently mention in the other videos, on TaigenTanks.com's website, there is a section called the Scratch and Dent. The Scratch and Dent is a page where Taigen lists models that are either used or damaged in one way, shape, or form or another, and they list them under a discounted price. Now, for anyone who's a builder like myself, where you like to redetail and repaint the model, the Scratch and Dent is a really good choice to look into because the models come damaged and because of which are at a discount. Since you are going to redetail and repaint the model anyway, it's a good way to get into one of these kits and save a little bit of money rather than opting for the completed intact version, which tend to be slightly more expensive, and you're paying for a paint job that you're going to be basically redoing anyway. Now, each model that is listed is an individual, as again, it depends on the type of damage and severity of damage that the model underwent during its shipping process. However, each model that is found on the Scratch and Dent section is on a first come first served basis, so if you're perusing the section and you see something you like, you might want to jump on it fast because once the model is sold, it's not going to return. In addition to what I just mentioned, the number of kits that are listed as well as the variety of kits listed also depends on what Taigen really has on stock at any given time. So it is definitely something worth checking out once every week or so. Now, this model here I acquired a little over a year ago, and it's been sitting in the stash ever since in its original shipping carton. Let me go ahead and cut open the tape to show what's on the inside. My little box cutter here, I'm going to go ahead and open up the tape. Now when the model first came in, I did open it up just to verify if everything was intact. And then once everything had the green light, I just simply sealed it back up and off into storage it went. Taking the tank out of the carton. Will reveal its retail box. Now, just like with the other Taigen builds that I've done on the channel, the box art is basically the same. All of the Taigen and Toro kits, for that matter, have the same type of illustrations, where the box is just this brown natural cardboard coloring. We have here a black and white printing of the tank model in question. In this case, it's a 75mm M4A3 Sherman. We got some verbiage about radio control functions. Here we have the IMEX logo. Again, IMEX is the US importer. Now, what I've seen from other videos, as well as other Europeans that have similar kits, this marking here is of a different brand. As for the rest of the packaging, it's, again, very simplistic. And it's just the same graphics repeated throughout the rest of the box. Underneath the top sleeve brings us to this inner carton that we have here. The cardboard is very thick, so these Taigen tanks in general are packaged quite well. Although this one did suffer some kind of damage at some point, but I'll go into that once I crack open the box. And here's the inside portion of the box. We have here a aftermarket charger. Now, this was a special offer at the time when I purchased this tank. There was a package deal where Taigen would throw in a free battery charger. By the way, these chargers are highly recommended. They're sold on Taigen Tank's website and do a very good job at charging your 7.2. Digging into the box, we have here our 7.2 battery. These are the typical batteries that are supplied with these RTR 1/16 scale models. Now, generally, I don't utilize these, and I swap them out for one that has higher amperage, but I'll go over that as the build videos progress. This is the stock battery charger here. Nothing really to write home about. Some instructions for the aftermarket charger. And here we have a box full of accessories. Again, quite standard for these RTR 116s. Opening the box has us the smoke fluid, which had some leakage. A little baggie of spare track. And another bag with a Peeping Tom tank commander, as well as some other details like the M2 HB50 and the 50 caliber barrel storage equipment. More information on this, of course, is to follow. And next is the IR indicator. Now, this model here, unlike many of the other builds that I've showcased on the channel, where those ones have the airsoft firing BB, this one here is an infrared model. The difference, of course, being is that first, this one does not shoot any BB whatsoever. Instead has a flash and I believe a recoil system to it. And this one here can fight in RC tank battles, which is what this little receptacle here is. Just a simple unit, and it plugs into one of the hatches on the turret. This system here is very similar to what I've seen used on the 1/16 scale Tamiya IR battle systems as well. Now, lifting off the top carton takes us to the actual tank itself. Taking out the contents versus the radio. Set that aside. Now let me pull the actual tank out itself. Don't believe there's anything else in the box. Nope, don't need this anymore. And here's the tank. Tank is wrapped in a nice bubble wrap little envelope. And in most cases, the packaging is very well done. Now, once I peel it out, you're going to see why this tank was a scratch and dent special. And here's the model now totally out of the packaging. As one can quite clearly see, this tank here has a replacement upper hull, and the upper hull is in its virgin green plastic. At some point, the upper hull was probably damaged and cracked, and the fellows over at TaigenTanks.com went ahead and swapped it with this new unpainted version that we have here. Now, this is the first time a Taigen 1/16 scale rendition of the M4 Sherman has come across the desk. In the past, the other 1/16 RDR Sherman variants I've done were that of the Henlong. Now, the Henlong and the Taigen kits are very similar with the quality of detailing. In fact, I would go so far as say that I believe the Taigen tank is evolved from the Henlong tooling. However, the Taigen does have a much more improved and sophisticated lower chassis compared to the Henlong. Another key difference between the Taigen and the Henlong renditions are the turret itself. The Taigen unit that we have here is a standard 75mm Sherman tank, while the Henlong variant is with the 105mm howitzer. Another key difference between the Taigen and the Henlong is that the Taigen is a lot more heavier compared to the Henlong counterpart, more than likely due to the fact that the Taigen features a lot more metal components for the suspension as well as even the lower hull, which I'll be going over once I crack this guy open. Let me go over the Taigen hull detailing. Like I was saying before, the Taigen and the Henlong hulls are very similar in their detailing, and really both of which are almost heavily inspired, if not copied detail-wise, from the old Tamiya M4A3 Sherman tanks in 1/35 scale. As many of the details and the overall design and quality of details are very reminiscent of each other. The tools are actually not molded on. They are, in fact, separate pieces that are glued on, which for this build I'm actually going to have to pry them off. But again, more information on that is to follow. The suspension itself is nicely rendered in that it is full function. And if you notice, the Taigen units have a different pattern of row wheel compared to the Henlong units. The Taigen row wheels are the late pattern stamped dish wheel rendition. And there are several options on the market available for different Sherman wheel types. Taillights are almost identical to the Henlongs, with the same type of inaccuracy that I generally have to address. And here goes the rear flip grille. Again, very, very reminiscent to the Tamiya 1/35 scale offering, complete with the missing hull section over here, which is a mistake on the 135 Tamiya, and was carried over on both the Henlong and the Taigen. But again, more information on that is to come as the video goes on. Well, that should wrap up the exterior detailing. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and now talk about the RC mechanical systems. In order to do that, I need to first...
Hey, pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
Pop the hood.
Now, this is one aspect where the Taigen and the Henlong models are drastically different. The Henlong model is not really designed to come apart, and it's meant to stay together as one piece. On the Henlong model, the upper and lower hulls are affixed together with a series of fasteners, and get access to the battery, there's a removable plate on the bottom of the model. On the Taigen tank, it's a different story. Just like with the other models that are made by Taigen, the upper and lowers are designed to come apart via a quick connect latch. Now, just like what's seen on the Tiger ones, there's a small little metal latch directly above this portion here of the rear idler wheel. By hitting that little latch, this unlocks the upper hull, and the unit can disengage. With the upper separated from the lower, you get to see what the interior components are. First, just like with all of these RTR models, there is an umbilical cord which connects the upper hull to the CPU. Now, the upper hull umbilical cord is for basically the turret functions, as well as also the head and tail lights, not to mention the bow machine gun, all of which, of course, work on this model. Let me just quickly disconnect that for the time being. Now, because this model is also the IR variant, there are some more umbilical cords that connect to the CPU in this section over here. If you notice, this tank does have a slip ring for 360-degree rotation, which is a nice feature found on this model. Now, in order to fully remove the upper from the lower hull, there are a few connections on the CPU that need to be disengaged. Now, one thing that I did off camera was with a swipe of green and red paint, I marked both the section on the CPU as well as the matching plug. The reason why I did that was that this will prevent any sort of confusion when it comes time to reconnecting everything back together again. For the paint, I just used Testors enamels, which are nice and cheap and are more than visible enough for me to make them out and tell what they are when it comes time for the reconnecting process. Anyway, to disconnect, I'll just unplug them first. Now, the wires look to be very fine, so you want to be very careful when it comes time to yanking them out, as you don't want to cause any sort of breakage with the circuitry. And then there's a third plug that we have here that gets unplugged. Now, this plug here is very rudimentary in design. It's just a piece of shrink tubing over a small little male and female lead. From what I've seen, plugging them back together is a little bit more problematic than removing. So it's definitely something you want to pay attention to during the reconnecting phase. With the upper hull out of the way, let's go ahead and talk more about the lower. Starting with the tank's lower hull, the entire lower hull section is comprised of a single casting of die-cast metal. This in turn gives the model's hull a nice, rigid, solid construction, and it also gives it a lot of weight. The weight is a very good thing, specifically in terms for a rate-controlled tank, because it slows down the model's speed and also gives the model better performance when dealing with off-road running. Moving from the lower hull now brings us to the tank's gearbox. Now, the gearbox that we have here appears to be the ball-bearing steel gearbox, which are made by Taigen. Now, these gearboxes are sold separately on the TaigenTanks.com website and are a fantastic upgrade for anyone who has either a headlong or a Taigen model with the plastic gears or with the zinc glass jaw pattern of gearbox. These install very easily and will give you a lifetime of problem-free running. Now, I'm not sure if these gearboxes here are standard with the Taigen M4 Sherman series, or if these were an upgrade that were added by TaigenTanks.com in order to sweeten the deal to sell off the kit that we have here. Regardless, this is one last addition that I need to make to this build. From the gearbox now brings us to the transmission cover, which again, just like with the lower hull, is comprised of die-cast metal. Now, one addition that Taigen made to the gearbox, which again is better than the version on the headlong, is that Taigen went ahead and molded the rivet strip directly to the transmission housing. On the Taigen model, this is actually integrally molded into the upper hull. On the Taigen models, this is a very nice addition because this is more realistic, and also it's one less modification that I'm going to have to make to this build, which is something that I generally have to do to the headlong renditions. Moving from the nose now brings us to the remainder of the electronics. Here we have the speaker, and the model I believe has the V3 pattern of electronics, if I'm not mistaken. The tank is 2.4 gigahertz powered and utilizes their T5 radio transmitter. In addition to that, we have the smoke generator system, which again is just standard off-the-shelf Taigen. And one feature that the Sherman has that is different from the other builds is the battery well that we have here. There is a small little Velcro strap, which is typical for these Taigen models. But while on the Tiger, the battery is laying flat on this little plastic tray, on the Sherman, it's actually lying upright in this nice little cubby that we have here. From the inside now brings us to the running gear. I briefly mentioned before about the wheels, but I neglected to mention that one addition that the Taigen has that's better than the headlong are that the rubber tires on the wheels are actually made from real rubber. On the headlong models, these are just molded one piece in plastic. Like I said before, suspension is fully functional. Now this model here is the older style, which has this crummy type weathering on it. Now, from what I've seen, the newer renditions of the Taigen Sherman tanks, this is no longer offered, and the tanks come with a clean coat of olive drab. For the purpose of this build, however, this is irrelevant because, again, the entire model is going to be repainted anyway. Now, in addition to the metal suspension components, by the way, the housings are all metal as well, which is, again, different from the headlongs. The sprockets, of course, are die-cast, as well as the track. Now, the track being metal is both good and bad at the same time. It's good in that the tracks are very, very robust and durable. However, the detriment has to do with the style of track that we have here. If we notice, the pattern of track is the rubber chevron pattern, and being molded in metal is a bit problematic because when you're trying to run the tank, the paint's going to wear off, and you're going to have steel exposed on sections which on the real tank would be made from rubber. So this is definitely something I'm going to need to address, but more information on that is to follow. Moving towards the back, again, we have here a little latch mechanism. We have the rear section here. It's nice and flat. Now, this is incorrect for a Sherman, as this area here is supposed to be boxed in for the rear deflector grill to actually pivot up and fold inside. Again, I'll be addressing that as the build goes on as well. This now brings us to the exhaust system. Being an M4A3, it utilizes the gooseneck pattern of exhaust, and it has the small hatch for access to the Ford GAA. It also features on the lower hull the tow shackle mounts, as well as the tow hitch mount as well. To turn the tank on, there's a single on and off switch on the bottom, as well as the smoke system activation switch. Now, unlike the other versions of the Taigen models in which the bow hatches are fully able to function, on the Sherman that's not the case. They are molded directly to the upper hull, which is definitely a small ding to this model, but again, more information on that is to come as well. Now that I have the tank back together again as one piece, I'm going to be doing a quick little function test just to make sure everything is in working order just before I go ahead and start with the rebuilding process. If any mishap were to happen, it's as much as a surprise to me as it is for you all viewing. Now, to turn it on, I'll first, of course, turn on the radio. And to turn on the tank, this is again done via a switch located on the bottom of the tank. I could hear the sound system charge up, and all of the lights are blinking on both the tail and the headlights. This is a good sign. And to fire it up, it's just like with the airsoft firing unit. Okay, I could hear the smoke system puffing away, and the lights stopped blinking, so everything's macroed in. The sound system appears to be working okay. Let me go ahead and turn the turret.
And it's gone.
Okay, take two. Now with a fresh battery mounted, you can rotate the turret. Elevate the gun. And depress the gun as it's on one circuit. Alright, now let me fire the infrared. That's pretty cool. As you can see, the gun has a nice snappy recoil, and the flash does work very well. Smoke is bellowing out, and just like on the headlongs, the smoke system is just going to accumulate in this section over here because the exhaust deflector grill is molded solid. Of course, this is something I'm going to address as the build progresses. But the smoke system is definitely working, as you can clearly see. We'll just check to see if the drive works. Yep, so far, mechanically speaking, the model is tip-top, which now gives me a fantastic base to work on from here to enhance it further. And here we have the model at about the 50% point. At this point, all of the modifications need to be made mechanically have all been done, and I've also been working on several of the detail fittings on the exterior portion of the hull. It is going to be at this point where I'm going to get the hull in its prime, as well as its base coat, so I can get the turret then mounted, and then I could then wrap up the last of the detail work on this vehicle. Now, moving this aside so I can focus on the mods that have been made to the lower hull. Now, electronically speaking, the vehicle is left stock. Stock gearbox, stock sound card, as well as the stock CPU. What has been changed mechanically is with the battery. Rather than sticking with the typical batteries that are supplied with these models here, I went ahead and replaced it with a 5000 milliamp battery, and this is the same one that I've used on several of these 116 builds. In fact, in the video description below, I have a link to the Amazon page where you can buy these batteries. They are highly recommended and definitely improve the performance of the vehicle. Now, connected to the battery, another modification I made was with the recharge system. Now, if anyone's a frequent viewer of this channel, you'll notice that on these 116s, I always like to have some sort of a remote recharge system on these vehicles, as opposed to taking the model apart constantly in order to charge the battery. Why this is important is because when the model is fully built, detailed, and weathered, it becomes a lot more fragile, and having to manipulate this little latch back here in order to take it apart can become problematic. So rather than going with that approach, I went with a recharge jack system where you remove an access hatch, yank out the cord, and you can charge the battery from the exterior without needing to dismantle it. Now, on the Sherman here, it's actually a little bit trickier compared to some of the other vehicles, namely their Tiger 1. On the Tiger 1, you have the functional bow hatches, which gives you a perfect access point to get into the hull. Unfortunately, on the Sherman, that's not the case. On the Sherman, the bow hatches are molded solid, as well as the other hatches found on the upper hull. Now, I had the idea on moving the recharge system in towards the turret. However, with the IR system, the turret is just jam-packed with a ton of machinery, and trying to get this guy in there was also impossible. So on the Sherman here, I went ahead and came up with a solution on how to charge the vehicle. And that is with this access hatch that I have here on the bottom. Let me flip the hull over and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, here on the lower hull, your eye should be drawn to this little red square that we have here. Now, this little red square is actually present on the real Sherman, and on the real vehicle, this is your actual escape hatch. On the model here, it serves double duty. It's not just a detail element, but it is also the point to which you recharge the vehicle. The piece pops off, and here's the escape hatch / access hatch that we have here. Now, this is actually a new component listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. It is a 3D printed component that has magnets which are supplied. The magnets come in two sets. 4 are located on the hatch, and the other 4 are designed to be mounted on the inside portion of the hull. Now, on the Taigen models, the hull is made out of a metal, but it's zinc, and zinc is just non-magnetic. It's just, you could be doing this all day and it's just not going to stick. On the inside of the model here, I went ahead and glued steel strips to the inside, as well as magnets on top of those steel strips over the corresponding holes that we have here. This gives you now the ability to lock the hatch into place, and it won't shake off when the vehicle is in operation. And the beauty about it is that it requires no tools or any other sort of a device to remove. You just grab it and just yank it off. Now, this system can be used on the Taigen, the Matto, or even the Henlong Sherman as well. Now, the battery system is going to, once the vehicle is fully buttoned up, the jack will be directly over this port here, and you just yank the system out and you'll be able to charge your vehicle. Now, this model does have to be charged while sitting on its side, so it is a little bit more troublesome to charge compared to, say, something like a Tiger 1, but in my opinion, it's easier to do than trying to manhandle that latch and deal with all of the wires and other fittings that are on the inside. Now, in order to do this mod, the speaker does have to be moved. On the stock Taigen model, the speaker is mounted to the floor via 4 holes that are located in these sections over here. Oddly enough, 2 of these holes were repurposed for the escape hatch. The other hole is just this little guy that's an odd man out, and he's just basically just an appendix of where the speaker used to be mounted. Now, on the inside, rather than keeping the speaker mounted flat, I went ahead and secured it to the wall with some silicone. This frees up the interior space over here for the recharge jack system. Now, the recharge jack is also another system that is sold on the EastCoastArmory.com product line, in case anyone was wondering. From the speaker now takes us to the smoke system. Now, the smoke system was another unit that needs to be modified in order to keep the top deck from needing to be removed. On the stock Taigen model, in order to refuel the smoke system, you need to take the top off, pop this off this little rubber seal, and this gives you the spout in which to pour in the smoke fluid in order to top it off. On the model here, I went ahead and had to extend it so that I can fill it up remotely. Now here you see half the system, and the only thing it required was for me to tap into that hole that I mentioned before for the original filler spout, and I attached this rubber tube. Note the springs that we have on here are just to prevent the tube from kinking due to the geometry of the upper hull. Now the remainder of the equipment is located on the upper, namely right here on this filler spout. Note the rest of the detail of the filler caps have been mounted except for this one here, and that's because this one here is the actual filler for the smoke system. This system is very similar to what I use on the 1/6 scale vehicles that I frequently build on the channel. On the inside, it basically looks like this. Here we have a little nozzle which glues directly to the top deck and is flush with the unit over here, and we have a provision for mounting a rubber tube. When the vehicle gets assembled, these two rubber tubes get connected, like so. Once connected, you can then go ahead and mount, or I should say, put the upper hull onto the lower, like that. And with this, you now have the two halves of the hull locked in place, but you have access now to refuel the smoke system. Now, some people are probably watching this and wondering, yeah, John, but what about the detail of the axis cap? Well, I actually have a special axis cap that's just for this slot over here. Externally, it's going to look identical to these units here, but it's going to have a stem on it so it plugs directly in place, so when not in use, it looks like any of the other detailing found on the top deck. From the mechanical systems, now takes us to the lower hull mods. Now, the mods made to the lower hull are the same ones that I generally make to the Henlong Shermans, and the Matto, Henlong, and Taigen all need the same upgrades because they all frankly have the same mistakes. And in terms of the Sherman, where the mistakes are made is with this guy right back here. On the rear portion of the Sherman, on all of the kits that I just mentioned, they are missing this entire section of detailing. On the Henlong kit, which I believe is where all the other 1/16 Sherman kits basically derive from, they copied the old school Tamiya M4A3 Sherman. And on that vehicle, it's missing all the same detail here, and the grille looks identical to the one on the Tamiya M4A3 and mounts to the upper hull the same way it does on the, you guessed it, Tamiya M4A3. So to further enhance the model, I went ahead and fabricated the missing sections here of the rear hull. Now, starting with the actual structure itself, this set here is actually a detail upgrade set sold on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. It consists of the two sections of the missing sponson, which also have the side wall, and you have the bottom shelf section that we have here. Now, the way it gets secured is directly to the rear plate here of the model. On all of these 1/16 Shermans, the rear plate is just one piece and it goes directly down the way we see it here. The unit just assembles directly to this section. Now, on the Henlong, it's a little bit easier because the lower hull is made from plastic. With this guy being made out of metal, it's still doable, but you need to be a little bit more creative with your adhesives. Here, you can see I use some white Gorilla Glue in addition to the other super glues that I normally use on this application here. Now, the pieces are made of resin, and I also supply sections of plastic angle, which are used as a rigidity brace to really secure and help everything and keep everything where it needs to be. Also, when you go ahead and mount this shelf system, the rear grill work needs to be moved. Like I said before, the rear grill is mounted to the top deck on the stock model. However, on the real Sherman, that's not the case. It's actually mounted to these sections here of the sponson, which of course are missing on the stock model. The grill work is the stock unit. I just amputated it from the rear hull and secured it in place here. Now, in addition to doing that, I also went ahead and hollowed it out. Here you can see that you could look directly through the slits. On the stock model, and this is again true on the Henlong, the piece is solid with its plastic molding. Obviously, this is something that's less than ideal, specifically since the whole point of this grill is to diffuse the smoke from the exhaust manifold system. Now, in order to do this, once the piece is amputated off the upper hull, I put it on my vise on the mill, and I mill away just the rear section here of material, which is all that's needed to open these grill slats up. Of course, once the sections are milled away with the help of a needle file, I go into these little slats here just to refine them and make sure that there's no other burrs or any other sorts of debris that are clogging up the system. Now, on the real Sherman tank, if anyone watches the 1/6 scale videos that I do, you'll know that this piece can actually pivot out of the way and fold up into this recess here when not in use. For the 1/16 model, however, that's just not the case, and basically it's just jury-rigged to the way you see it here. Now, the way everything is spaced out is that once the top deck gets mounted to the hull, everything looks exactly where it needs to be. However, one modification that you are going to have to do in addition to this is you are going to have to remove that chunk of plastic which is molded into the rear plate here. This chunk of plastic is a reinforcement that holds the grill in place. When you remove the grill and mount it over here, it's going to make contact with some of these shelf pieces, so it's best just to take your Dremel with a high-speed removal tool and just remove as much of that stuff as possible so that you can be able to get the hull fitted in place in a nice, smooth, and efficient manner. Now, with this piece now added, I also have to make some changes to the upper sponson. Now, on the Taigen kit, there's a little hinged little lever in this section over here, which allows you to open up the top deck. On this model here, I amputated and deleted that feature because I wanted to add the other detailing. And on the Sherman, specifically the M4A3, the Little Joe auxiliary generator is mounted right here on top of the sponson. And then there's this long, slim conduit that runs along the sponson and emerges right here towards the aft of the hull. Now, this set is from EastCoastArmory.com, just a rested unit and mounted directly into place. But to do so, the little latch has to go. Now, I can still access the inside by just grabbing this little piece here and pulling it, but it is going to be a little bit trickier, specifically once the tracks are fitted, which is why, again, I needed to make the recharge jack and the smoke system refill as remote as possible. So getting into this hull here is going to be for very rare emergencies. Another ECA item that was added are the little access caps that we have here on the two sponsons, and these are found on all of the Sherman variants. Moving down, you can also see I replaced the molded in tow hook mounts with the ECA rested ones. Now, this was done because I went to drill out the stock ones. The stock ones are solid metal. Unfortunately, the bit I was using was a poor quality bit and it shattered the pieces, so unfortunately I wasn't able to salvage them. And when one broke, I had to redo all of them. So that's why you see the rested ones in place. Now, outside of the rest and tow hooks, you'll also see that I added the sculpted well beads in all these sections over here. The sculpted well beads were continued on all of the surfaces where they would be found on the real vehicle, which would include the top portion here, where the two sponson halves meet. There are a well bead that's found in these locations. Well beads are also found on the sides, and on this vehicle, I continued it all along the top portion of the sponson. Generally, this is, again, a feature I incorporate on larger scale builds, but for this one, I had this stuff on hand, I might as well use it. Same can also be said on the well bead on the opposite side. Now, while on this side, you can see these 4 holes here have been plugged up with the bodywork. These 4 holes are found on the Taigen kit, and these secure the battery box to the side here, or to the side wall, I should say, of the hull. The fasteners were removed, re-added with red Loctite to make sure they'll never come loose ever again, and then the holes were just plugged and deleted via the bodywork. You can also see some mods have also been made to the bogie suspension systems themselves, with the addition of some cast texturing, which greatly helps the look of these units. And I also went ahead and drilled the 4 holes that we have here on the faces for all of the VVS housings. On the real Sherman, the housing was invertible, so that with one housing casting, you could use it for either side of the vehicle, and then you just bolt on the skid rail and the roller mount on the opposite side for the versions for the reverse side of the vehicle. But you will still have the mounting holes found on all these sections over here. This is also true for the units found on the opposite side as well. And while on the cast texturing, you can see that the texturing was also applied to the front transmission housing of the vehicle. Now, there are going to be some other details that are going to be added to this piece here, but this is going to be discussed in more depth in part 2 of this video series. And from there, this now takes us to the top deck. Now, the top deck has got a bunch of detail mods that have been added to it since its original form. Starting with the bow hatch area, you can see how that this unit here is replicating cast texture, while the rest of the upper hull sections would be roll plate. And this goes back to what made the A3 easier to put together compared to the earlier Sherman variants. On the earlier Sherman variants with the blistered front bow hatch areas, you had a lot of components which need to be casted, as well as roll plate sections which need to be puzzled and mosaic together in order to form the shape of the hull. On the A3, this was simplified. We have here one solid steel plate minus the cast machine gun plug, but that's something for another topic. And on the top deck, we have one large section for the hatches. This would have been cast, and the remainder plates, which would have been welded together. And here you can see a close-up of the cast texturing found on the hatch wells. Now, the hatches were cast as well, and texturing will be added to these shortly after. Now, the weld beads are located in all these sections over here. Now, the model does have some very basic rudimentary welds that are found in these sections, but they are on the very simplistic end, and by just highlighting them over with the sculpted epoxy versions does increase the accuracy of the build. You can also see I went ahead and puttied up all the holes from where the tools were originally mounted, and these are all going to be sorted out towards the end of the build. Now, here on the back, you'll notice I also deleted the plastic rack because I have a replacement version from ECA that I'm going to be mounting again. More information on that is to come in the part 2 section of this video. Here you can see the brush guards. I just kept the stock brush guards because they are very durable, and the only modification I really made was the addition of the little tube that we have here on the sides of the brush guards. These are common on the M4 Sherman series, and the purpose is when the headlight's not in use, there's actually a chain retained plunger that goes in, plugs up the hole, and prevents moisture from getting inside the vehicle. Here on the travel lock, I had that little eyelet. The eyelet is what's used to actuate a lock mechanisms, which keeps these little fingers either in the open or closed state. The machine gun barrel, the stock one, looks like an MG34, and I went ahead and modified it by cutting off the barrel section because I have a replacement ABER brass M1919 barrel en route. Once this added, this really makes the piece look a lot better compared to the stock counterpart. Now, currently the top deck is going to be headed off into paint so that I could get the turret then mounted on. As for the turret, here is the system that we have here. It looks almost identical to the way it did before, except I went ahead and deleted the molded in periscope, which by the way was also done on the bow. I have replacement 3D printed units on hand, but because of their frailness, these really need to be done once the model's hull is basically good to go, and you're not going to be taking it off because those pieces are oh so frail and fragile. You can easily break them. It's one of the dings on them, but I'll go over that later. As for the turret, the only mods that I've done right now, as you can see, I'm in the process of deleting those fastener locations on these sections here. The turret has been tested, all the functions work, and once these units are plugged up, I could then finish the rest of the bodywork and then get this guy mounted to the then painted top deck. Now, in order to take the turret off of the hull, by the way, I have to make one mod, and that is with this little plug that we have here. On the upper hull, I added a corresponding 2-pin plug to these two sections. On the stock model, the turret is just permanently soldered to these two sections over here, so you're not going to be able to remove the turret from the upper hull with its stock configuration. In order to do this, the plug was mounted. Where here's the build now coming towards its end. Now, unfortunately, I had a lot more things that I mentioned and pointed out, but regrettably, those were lost on a corrupted memory stick. However, one thing I do want to point out is with the reinstallation of the wheels. You see, with the way the Taigen wheels are assembled, we have here the rim, the rubber tire, and then there is a brass bushing on the inside that is held in place to the swing arm via a fastener. It's a very nice design and one that does work extremely well. To reinstall it, however, I do like to add a small little modification to the stock piece, which is just one that can easily be made and will help the model run in the long run. First and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of Loctite here. I'm going to put a little drop on the threads found on the outer section here of the swing arms. This will just prevent the fastener from working itself loose while the model is in operation. Now I'm using red Loctite. For this, you can use blue Loctite or possibly purple Loctite, which are weaker in strength, all three of which should be more than suffice at doing the job at hand. The red Loctite probably might be a little bit on the overkill side, but I am using a small amount of it, so it should easily be overcome if I ever need to remove it via the screwdriver. And if anyone's wondering, well, why am I using red Loctite? Simply put, I don't have any other of the other formulas on file, and this one here should be suffice for my build. But it's something to keep in mind for anyone out there who's working on one of these tanks. So like I said, I'm just going to put a very finite amount of Loctite into the threads. Like so. Now, let me bring the camera in closer so you get to see exactly how much material was used. Okay, and here's the material now on the threads. Unfortunately, a little bit came out from the threads and went on the bearing surface area, and this is something that you don't want to have. So either with your finger or with a rag or both, you just wipe the extra material off just so that it's exclusively on the internal threads. From this point here, I'm going to take the bushing and just slide it directly into the wheel. No other adhesives or any other type of glues or chemicals are required. Just simply line it up in place. Now, since there's Loctite already on the threads, I'm not going to have to add it to the end of the bolt. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take a small little swipe of grease and smear it on the middle section here. You see, when the model is in operation, the brass rubs up against the threaded shaft here of the fastener. Most of the time, it doesn't really cause any problems, but I could possibly see if for extended use, it may start having an effect, but again, it's still on the lower end. However, in order to mitigate that as much as possible, I am going to add a small little drop of grease right here, and that's really all that's required. From this point on, it just slides directly. Actually, this is, on second thought, this is a little too much. There we go. Just in the threads like that. If you notice, I did not put it on the end because, of course, this needs to be left intact for the Loctite to secure to. So from here, it just slides in place, and then I just go ahead and thread it back on. Taking these off, by the way, when the kit was new, was extremely easily done. There were no other adhesives holding these fasteners in place, so they just come right out. Okay, and you see how the wheel spins freely? The grease will, of course, help with the wheel's rotation, and it does make for, in my opinion, a smoother running model. Another thing I want to point out is that on some of the swing arms, when you're tightening these fasteners in place, you may restrict the row wheel, preventing it from spinning more loosely than it actually can. This is something you do want to avoid. You don't want to have the fastener tightened too tight to restrict the motion, as then you're just putting more wear and tear on the wheel. So what I like to do is, like on this one here, you can see that it's snagging up in some, in I guess one little location or two. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosen the fastener slightly. And this will open up the tolerances, allowing the wheel to spin freely. And the advantage is you don't want to obviously take the fastener out too much because then it's not holding it in place. You want to find that nice middle ground there, and also this is a good reason why you want to have the Loctite, because with the fastener not bottomed out, the Loctite will then solidify in place, holding the fastener and preventing it from loosening up on you. And that's it. While on the lower hull, I'll briefly take you over to the switches. Here we have the main power switch painted in red, and the small blue switch here is painted in blue, and this switch is the cutoff for the smoke system. The different colors were used in order just to prevent any sort of mix-up on which switch does what. Well, here we have the build now coming to an end, and probably one of the last fittings I'm going to add to the build is the detailing for the M1919 bound machine gun. For the bound 1919, the kit did supply you with a basically detailed barrel, but on my 116 builds, I always like to replace that with an aftermarket one. The unit that I usually use is this brass set here from ABER. The set here was acquired off of eBay via the vendor listed below. Now, these have been a little tricky to come by in recent months due to, well, everything happening, but generally if you can have the opportunity to snag a couple of these sets, I strongly recommend it because they do really make the 116 builds look that much better once added. The ABER set consists of really two pieces. We have here the coolant jacket. Note the perforations are present in their appropriate locations, and then we have the center portion. Now, what's unique is that the barrel is actually CNC directly into the brass booster section, and the booster section does have its detailing in place if it can get into focus. And on the back section here, we just have an alignment peg. Now, this piece here is designed, of course, for static use, but on the RC tank, there is the flash feature for the machine gun fire. Obviously, if the piece is solid like this, this is not gonna help. So I usually make some modifications to this component in order to better prep it for use on an RC tank, and I'll show you exactly how this is done. First and foremost, the barrel itself needs to go. So I'm going to take a pair of wire cutters and just snip it off in a very unceremonious way. And then this piece here is done for. Now, the component here is still solid, so we're going to have to make a modification by drilling it out in order for the flash to come through. In addition to that, I'm also going to be using a piece of fiber optic on the inside, and the fiber optic does twofold. First, it gives you the missing barrel detailing that I just snipped away, but it also transmits light, so from the LED that's mounted inside of the tank, it will run through the fiber optic and through the end here of the booster, giving you the flash on the muzzle end. In order to thoroughly drill out the booster section, the best way to do it is on the lathe like I have here. Trying to drill this out on a drill press or even freehand is a problematic venture. You run the risk of drilling the hole canted, or even worse, you'll just end up just shearing and breaking some Dremel bits. So that's something that's best avoided by going with the lathe approach. Now, in case you're wondering where exactly do I get these bits like this, or what size bit this is, well, here I have the package, and this is the supplier that I do acquire my micro drill bits from. Alright, I'm just going to put a little drop of oil right there, and fire up the lathe. With the booster now drilled out, I'm going to turn my attention to the spacer. This spacer is going to be required for this modification for the same reason why it was there initially on the CNC turning. And that's, of course, to give stability and support for the barrel section, which on this unit here is going to be a fiber optic. Now, the brass section has already been snipped away, and this whole unit now is going to be drilled out basically with the exact same procedure that I used before, and of course I mean by using the lathe. And here's the unit now placed into the chuck. Now, like what we saw before, I left the stem found on the original CNC turning, and this was done on purpose because it makes it easier to put into the chuck here of the lathe. If I try to put this component into the 3-jaw chuck, it's so small that it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to properly get it centered in. With the stem, it just grabs onto the spindle and keeps a piece securely in place. From here, I can then just drill it out. Now, what's going to happen is that with the drill bit basically being the exact same size of the stem, when the unit goes all the way through, it's just going to snap off at the stem portion, and then the brass turning will be stuck on the drill bit. At that point there, the piece can be removed, and you're done with this step. Also, another step that I did before I put into the chuck was with a file. I filed away the little burr which was remaining from when I snipped it off of the CNC stem that I mentioned before. Well, without further ado, threw some oil on it. Let's get this thing drilled. Well, on this one, the stem didn't fully crack off, so to get rid of it further, I'm just going to go ahead and snip it off with the wire clipper. The next bit of detailing needs to be trimmed is the barrel shroud. You see, the ABER set is really meant to replace the barrel on a fully exposed M1919A4 machine gun. Because of that, the shroud itself is much longer than it needs to be if you're using it for a mounted roll. A common mistake that I see on some builds out there for individuals who go ahead and upgrade their 1919s with this system is they just stick it as is into the unit here and they call it a day. And unfortunately, it's way too long than what would be acceptable. If you look on a real Sherman tank, basically about that much of the barrel is exposed on the real unit. The remainder of the barrel gets gobbled up by the mounting harness and cradle system that's found on the inside. For this model here, I'm going to add probably about 1/8 of an inch more than what is needed for the exposed barrel because of the inset found on this section over here. The LED sits in at a good, I don't know, about 1/4 of an inch or so from the exterior portion of the barrel. So with that in mind, I'm just going to add that to the barrel length that I'm going to adjust for the visible section of the barrel. So I marked the portion on the barrel shroud that I'm going to trim away. For this, I'm going to use this hacksaw that I have here. The only reason why I'm using that is because at the moment I can't seem to track down my X-Acto mini saw, which for this procedure I recommend using that tool as opposed to this gargantuan mess of a tool here. But it should yield for the same result. Now, one of the reasons why I am using the lathe is, again, you want to get a nice, precise, square cut, and this is one of the best ways to do it. Because of the way the unit was cut, there is a little jagged edge, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to square it off with the lathe tool. So I'm just going to line everything up and then just square it off. When I'm done with that, I'm also going to deburr it further with the use of a cylindrical needle file. So let's go ahead and make with the cutting. Alright, now that you have the barrel shroud shortened, the booster and the aligner trimmed and drilled, it's now time for assembly. I'm going to first start with the aligner, so I'm just going to take a little drop of glue, add it towards the inside portion here of the shroud, and then just line this guy up where he needs to go, and just press fit him in place, like so. Same thing is also going to be done with the booster. We'll drop the super glue, and then this piece would just, again, drop in place. So there we have our now adjusted M1919 barrel, but it's not fully complete yet because now I need to add the fiber optic. For the fiber optic, I'm using this gauge here from this supplier. And I've had some pretty good results from using this material on other past builds. Now, what's interesting about fiber optic is that when it comes time for gluing it in place, you can't use super glue. You see, apparently the super glue has a chemical reaction to fiber optic, and because of that, it actually makes it extremely brittle and it'll just crack up on you. You also can't use materials like hot glue because this actually melts and deforms fiber optic cabling. I'm pretty sure there is a specialty super glue type adhesive out there that is fiber optic safe. However, I don't have any of that in the shop at the moment. So I'm going to be utilizing basic white Elmer school glue for the procedure. The school glue actually works very well in keeping the fiber optic at bay. So I just dip the end over here in the super glue. And now I'm just going to thread it into the aligner and the barrel booster. And there we go. From this point here, I'm going to snip it off. And now I can go ahead and get the barrel into paint. Now, if you notice, I left the fiber optic long on purpose on either end. This is because it allows me a good grasping point to paint it and then add the weathering. And then when it comes time for installation, I just take the snips, snip off each end, and then the unit can get installed. By going with this route here, this actually makes painting and weathering a lot easier because you don't have to worry about overpainting on the muzzle end of the fiber optic. You just paint it, it becomes opaque, install it, snip it, and guess what? Now you have clean fiber optic on the barrel section. So the light can transmit directly through and flash on the other end, which of course will be more noticeable in part 3 of this video when I take the tank out for a test drive. And with that, that wraps up part 1 of this 3-part video series on this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Taigen M4A3 Sherman tank. If you like this video, stay tuned for part 2, as well as don't forget to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/16 scale and smaller scale model showcase videos like this fellow over here, or the other larger project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that frequently get posted to this channel. Finally, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for your time. See you in part 2.